Today, as part of our award-winning educators series, as we explore the narratives of failure and hope, it is our pleasure to welcome Dr. Jaqui de Matos-Alla, who is an associate professor of international relations at Wits University in Johannesburg, South Africa. Wits University has a mandate to be internationally distinguished for research, high academic standards, and a commitment to social justice in Africa and beyond. Dr. Matos-Alla is widely published. She is an award-winning educator and leader. Some of her most widely read works include, and this should signal some of the areas that she's curious about and has expertise in, titles such as Making the Invisible Visible, Challenging the Knowledge Structures Inherent in International Relations Theory in order to create knowledge plural curricula. She's also published on large class pedagogy, interdisciplinary perspectives for quality higher education, student engagement in large classes, and quality education despite the odds. She also has research interests in rural African women and domestic patriarchy through the lens of international gender bias. And so she's done case studies in women in development, in gender and development in South Africa and Zimbabwe. It is our distinct pleasure to welcome you to this conversation and to traverse all of the time zones and all of the different geographical divides in order to explore some of the conversations that we have today about narratives of failure and despair, but also of hope and delight. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So one of the things that Pat and I start in our conversations with our guests is just a very open-ended question, a question about what your story is. How did you get here? What drew you to the place that you are in the world? So it can be anything. It can be formal or informal, personal or professional, but just give us a glimpse of the story from your perspective.
Right. Yeah, I like the whole idea of hope and failure, because I got here. I think when I started off at university, I thought that I was going to be a lawyer, and I got into international relations, sort of because I didn't know what else to take with all my law subjects. And when I got to university, I really quickly discovered that I did not have a passion for law at all. But I really did enjoy all the social science side of my Bachelor of Arts degree. And I didn't get into law school because we do have to do an undergraduate degree before you do your law degree at postgraduate level. And I didn't get into school, but I did get into international relations postgraduate. And from there, I did my honors degree. We don't have a 4-year undergraduate degree in South Africa. We have 3 years plus an honors, and I did that. And then I went on to do my master's and was offered the opportunity to teach. But it wasn't until I was given what Wits tried to do at that time was that they were into social justice, kind of restorative justice, and they were looking for ways to help people disadvantaged by apartheid who seem to have the passion and have the abilities to function in higher education, but didn't have the matric marks to get in, to give them an alternative route into university. Because it was just so important as a way of empowering and equipping future generations of Africans. And so I started off teaching in a program that did academic development, that gave academic skills to students came from disadvantaged backgrounds. And the problem with this is that they would just add on skills, how to read an article, how to write an introduction, how to do research. And they were never attached to, really, there needed to be far more skills interwoven with content, we found, for students ready to get the benefits out of these programs. The teaching skills apart from content was not as productive as we hoped it would be. So what we did is that international relations was a very popular program at WITS. And so we started a foundation program, which was, for want of a better word, a bridging program between school and university. And so what we did is that we wanted to equip students with these skills, not only that they could develop these skills that they needed for university, but they could excel. And we didn't want them to use this 1 year where everybody, where it's a bridging course, and then only then do you go into your undergraduate degree. What we wanted to do was take these students, accelerate everything, and put them into the second year of study. And it was an amazing time. It was an amazing program. There were just so many things to learn. And I think from teaching in the academic side, the academic development side of higher education, made me realize that teaching and learning is a skill that you acquire. It's something that people study as their primary degrees. And here we expect people who have expertise in their discipline to arrive at university, and by osmosis and some miracle or magic, you know how to teach. And I think that what was amazing about being part of this program is that we were, there was a community of practice developing, and we were given academic development advisors who helped you think about, how to merge your program with the skills that you'd want to teach students, and how to do it in a very creative, exciting way, and how to come up with syllabus, a curriculum that looked very different from what we usually found in IR. And I think we got very social constructivist very early on, and we started teaching, introducing our students to international relations, looking at the international relations of the struggle against apartheid. We did some really, really interesting and innovative ideas. We took speeches from politicians and responses to those speeches from international relations people, and we got students to look at it and to analyze it and to think about what was being said and critically engage. And we got students to draw timelines of, when these things were happening and where their lives and their families' lives fitted into these things. So they could see everything as, multifaceted and complex. And it was a really, really fantastic time. And what was so fantastic even further about this is that how well these students did. We tracked them into their postgraduate programs. And, we have people that went on to do PhDs from this program. So we felt that it was very valuable, but then, universities, priorities change, and you get new people in leadership. And we had a change of leadership who felt that this was not money well spent for the university, and decided to close these programs. And I think it was done in a matter of 2 months. And so it was I think it was quite emotional for everybody who was part of this, because here we thought that we were doing amazing work. And and they're being told that no, this whole idea of that we will get to a stage in our development where everything would be fixed in our societies, that education would be superlative for everybody and nobody would need these programs anymore. And that's what, that's where we got. And ironically, we're, as WITS started moving away from these programs, the government started funding these programs as well. So yeah, often you find that the universities you're at seem to crazily be out of step with the moment. And I know that, given the past realities of the fact that education in this country hasn't gotten better for the vast majority of people who can't afford private education, and even those that can afford private education often come to university not knowing everything they needed to know. There's been a sort of a contemplation of maybe we should think about doing this again. But I think that the sad reality is that those skills have gone. The people who taught those programs have moved on, they're doing other things. And so sort of this whole cohort of educational knowledge that you had, you've lost, which was sad. And I can't say that I was very happy. I think I was a very malcontent academic for quite a while because of this. But then I think that we decided to move on and get involved in just the common academic pursuits of finishing your PhD and just consolidating everything that you do. But I was always interested in, it always nagged me that I had all this knowledge and that I had accumulated, but because it was never put to, it was never translated into a degree in education. It was just, knowledge that wouldn't be recognized. And we had postgraduate diplomas in higher education in the past at WITS, but in 2015 that was all brought back, and colleagues, the colleagues that I taught with in the foundation courses, they were the colleagues that were running these programs, and they said, well, don't you want to be a guinea pig and come and do this? You should know 90% of the stuff that we're talking about because we all played around with these people, and you should know the theorists. And so just come and be part of a whole bunch of university people that want to learn about higher education pedagogy. And so that was, and so I enrolled in the postgraduate diploma in higher education at WITS, and it was very interesting because not only was I was the only person from humanities there. By and large, the most faculty that we had were engineers. That was that was really interesting because they came from the stance of, well, this is a humanities thing, this is the social science, how hard can this be? And it was really funny watching them eat their words about the fact that a social science like education can be very intellectually taxing and difficult, and there's a lot of reading to cover, and there's a lot of skills to develop, and it's packed full of so many different ideas and ways of seeing the world and doing stuff. And I think what was really interesting is that we did a lot of looking at the social justice issues around higher education, which was I think really great for being in a university in Africa. We really enjoyed that, and I also signed up because of my interest in looking at knowledge from the global south. And so I found in my own discipline that, you know, we look at international relations very much from the perspective of the global north. But, you know, what happens, you know, where are the knowledge and the ideas and the histories and the international relations of the global south? Why don't we tell these stories? And if I designed a curriculum, how would I design one that did this? Sorry, excuse the cat. It's like the obligatory cat on the Zoom call. Every conversation now has one. It's amazing. They know when you're doing things. Unfortunately, you can edit that out. So I was, you know, thinking about, and so I couldn't find, you know, a lot of answers in my own discipline. And I looked at the field of curriculum development and looked at how much work had been done around knowledge inclusion in curricula. And knowledge exclusion as a you know, a form of yeah, I mean, sort of educational hegemony or political hegemony translated into the field of education that doesn't get seen, you know, explicitly, but is there implicitly by the choices that we make when we put our curriculum together, and all the things and the choices that we make that we don't see. And so I found the unit on curriculum very, very interesting. And then I decided, oh, what the hell, I'll do a master's in education and higher education, because that was, you know, so be the guinea pig again, and go and do that. And, you know, just so I could learn more and, you know, explore more on the whole idea of, you know, the scholarship of teaching and learning. Even though I had written in the area, you get an idea that as somebody who really isn't an expert in higher education and all the discourses, that there's a lot of stuff that you're missing. And I think that the reason why I extended my education, so I now hold dual qualifications in both international relations and higher education, is because I always wondered, well, you know, you know, the hubris of being a lecturer is that you think that you probably know everything there is to know, and probably you know a lot about your subject, but do you know a lot about, you know, the teaching that's underwriting your subject? You know, implicitly, you know, it sort of, it's really hard, but I think that if you lean to and you like the teaching side of academics, you sort of almost, there's an intangible element of knowing what would work in a classroom. You don't necessarily know why it works. You don't know all the thinking behind it and the educational psychology, but you come to a stage where you know what works. And I think if you are reflective in your teaching, I think that that's what we all do, is that we, you know, think about, well, you know, what I did was, you know, interesting. I came up with an interesting idea of how I think I could make this more accessible to the students, but did it actually work? And no, maybe if I go back and I tweak it. So my problem is that I think I'm constantly putting my curriculum all over the place, because I'm always convinced that there's a better reading, that there's a better way of doing this, that there's a better way of engaging the students, you know, especially when you're dealing with complicated and complex issues. And so I think that that's what makes you a good teacher, that I think that good teachers never think that they've arrived and that you now know everything. I think that the more that you are, you know, the more that you get involved in this, the more you realize that maybe you don't know everything, and there's a lot more to know, and there's a lot more people to talk about. And you know, it's nice to have things like educational communities of practice across, universities, because there are so many things that we can all learn from each other. And I think I often tell my students this. I think that I often point out to them that I failed my first year of university, and so I think that before you write yourself off as a failure and as somebody who can't, what you do after you failed is more telling of what you are as a person than the failure itself. And I think that it's important for students to hear this from an academic, because I think academics by themselves don't often fail at anything. I think everybody is very driven. We're all part of this, elite institution. We're a part of elite schools, and you don't get into graduate programs because your academics are sort of dubious when it comes to the marks. And so I think it's very important especially for South African students, to know that you don't always have to get it right the first time. That there are opportunities to do things over. And so that really is my story.
So many fantastic pieces in that story. So Jaqui, when you're thinking about it all and you're thinking about teasing it out, is there any part of that story or a different story, where it's like, this is what keeps me awake at night, or this is what gets you out of the bed in the morning, right? Like just the joyful thing or the rageful thing that is either, that just shapes your day or shapes your thinking around teaching and learning?
I think that what really inspires me is to get my students to look at things in much more detail, with a lot more nuance than they would probably like, and to ask questions that they probably don't want to ask, and to explore the world, and not just take the answers that everybody is giving to them about things. I often, my students are very, very good at, patting or trotting out African philosophers, post-colonial philosophers, but very few of them have read those. And so a lot of times what people do is they mimic what they've heard other people say. And so my first rule is that if you want to quote Fanon to me, read Fanon. Don't tell me what other people have said about these people. I want to know what you think about this, because even in these great works, there are blind spots and things that have changed now, and we want to look at things differently, and just to get students excited about what it is that they do. And I think especially now that we're going for a blended model, it's, I think, really, really important. I teach my final year undergraduate class, and my biggest worry is that there is the sort of temptation to just relax, and now that you can download lectures and you can hear the lecturer, then why do all the reading and attend all the classes? And so I think that it's even more important now to engage students, really drawing on the work that David Hornsby and I did on large class pedagogy and engaging students, that it's important to think about, how to get students even more engaged in what they're doing at this time, because there is the tendency to become really passive. And I think that is one of the things that with emergency remote teaching that we've been doing for the last 2 years, and now that we're coming out of this, it is the one thing that has really, really worried me, that there would be this desire to sit back and nobody's really watching me, and not to do that. And I think that it's something that we've all worried about as academics, that you can see it when students begin to, do, the summative, assessment parts of the courses, that when it comes to putting it all together, there are gaps. And that is something we need to work on, getting sorted out.
Jaqui, thank you so much for taking us through that story, and then for excavating some of those bits. And I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about the moments where you despaired and described yourself as a malcontent, and then the ways in which you managed to name that and sort of claim it, understand the convergences of that despair, and to aim it in generous and generative ways. And you talk about this journey of building a program that marries skills and content as your sort of first aha moment as an international relations professor, and then moving that into a kind of lived experience, getting them to do that timeline, getting them to do where were they at this moment, where were they, and how their lives converged as a deep form of personal engagement. And then talking about the transformative moments of this program, which had a social justice trajectory, just as it was exploring social justice and restorative justice, to have that rug pulled out from under you really, really rapidly, only in a few months' time after you knew the impact and transformation of this program. And you sat there and it was out of your sphere of control. It was out of your sphere of influence. Can you talk us through about how you went through the despair or the howling into the abyss, and what got you from despair and giving up, right? There's a real, I think, understandable reaction, which is disengagement, which is to go back to do things square again, to do them as we were trained to do them in isolated or in siloed ways. But then you re-engaged and you found a new life and a new avenue forward. Can you just talk to us about like how you sat in that despair, and then how you understood to aim it into future facing spaces?
Oh gosh. I think that I would lie to say that I wasn't very, I was really angry about that, because it was amazing work. You can edit that out.
No, cats are welcome. Cats are welcome. This is what we're taking into our post-COVID world.
We'll see one little tail just.
Yeah, no, it's the obligatory, cat video bombing of your Zoom, and yeah, the dog that all of a sudden needs to be your friend after ignoring you for a whole day. I think that I would lie if I said that we were all really, really upset and angry, and I think people moved. I think people tried to cope with it by moving on very, very quickly. I think that I went through a stage where everybody sees you as the teaching person, and I think I got upset about that. I didn't see that necessarily as a positive thing. That everybody went, you need to be, you need to be a real academic, and a real academic is more focused on their research than their teaching. So it's time to grow up and to get on with your academic career, move away from all this teaching stuff, and start acting like the mature grown-up academic that you are. And I think that life happened at that stage, and I think the reason why I didn't really get into really being miserable and angry is that I think in my private life so many things were happening. I had a mother that ended up with 2 terminal diseases. I ended up with kids that had special needs. And I think there were so many other things happening, and I was trying to balance everything together. And I think that, my educational expertise helped me understand what my children needed educationally as well. So I think that all brought me back to, a more central and centered place. And then I think that you begin to think, well, maybe all the lessons that we've learned in these programs aren't lost. Maybe we can use them in large classes. And maybe we don't have to do university the same way, because I think you often think about, and I think that we all do this, consciously or unconsciously, we think about the professors that we've had. And you often think of, if I wanted to be a professor, I want to be like that professor, or please may I never be like that person, who did that, because that was absolutely awful. And I think that what we try to do is that take the lessons that we had learned and all the excellent teaching that we had seen take place in these programs, and bring them into from what was essentially on the side right into the the core programs. And I think that was really interesting this year is that we've now built academic development into our whole undergraduate course, because I remember a sociologist saying to us, this whole thing about education is going to miraculously improve in South Africa. He called it the myth of transience, that this is just going to be a fleeting moment and then everything will be fine. And here we are, and we're still dealing with these realities for all kinds of reasons. And so I think that that's what you did, is that you found out that these things could live and be alive and well in other places and spaces, when they could be adapted. And I think about thinking that, and there was still a community of practice that we could still get together informally and talk about these things and to exchange ideas. And so I think we still have these these core people, and I think that it's really interesting that we all started off as young academics and that we've grown, and now all of a sudden we're in management, we're heads of units, we're deans, and I think that it's quite phenomenal to see everybody who's grown, and that we've got to a place where we can now teach other people and pass your skills on to other colleagues.
Yeah, so the sort of structures disappeared, but the knowledge is still there, and the inspiration from that knowledge is still there. And while at one point, it might have been quite a distressing or vulnerable time, but there is so much good that's grown out of it.
Yes, I think that. And the other interesting thing is that the initiative that WITS undertook was, they decided that we won't target first year students. What we'll do is that we'll go into the schools and target the final 3 years of education, bring those students to WITS, and for their holidays, and then give them supplementary. It started off as maths and science and English, and then they decided that if this was going to be a program for exceptionally gifted students that they had identified at the school level, then you wanted an expansion program. And so they came and said, well, would you like to teach international relations to school children? Which that was really what is interesting, because you're teaching to students that first of all don't really know what the subject is. Secondly, they want to be engineers and they don't know why they need to learn a social science. And it's also to teach teenagers that that really often claim that they feel disaffected by the political system, and that they feel that they have no agency or voice, and why should they worry about politics? And it's an opportunity to, work into that space, and to give these students, make them see the possibility that, even if you're young, if you understand these things, you can have agency. So that has also been a lot of fun.
And totally transformative for a wide range of achieving students. And I love that you told this story about failing your first year and not being the sort of perfect, impervious, well-packaged, shiny student at the beginning, that you had to fail and to figure out the consequences of that failure in order to find a place of belonging in an institution, as you rightly point out, that values a kind of elite and high achieving model, that it is a kind of impervious space. It's not a hospitable space for you to find yourself in belonging in these big structures. So how much work do you do first of all, how did you go from failing your first year? I dropped out before I failed out of my first 2 years. So I'm with you on the messy journey. But how did you, first of all, understand what and how to navigate a system that might not have been hospitable to you? And then how do you take your students along with you on that journey?
I think that what I did is that, I realized that when I started university, all these amazing things that we've now put in place with students, we didn't have. That I think that we and the onus is on us who know better to create a university environment that is more hospitable and humane for students, that that looks at the fact that young people who are coming in, they obviously often don't have it all together. They're get in and they're trying to find out who they are. They have often no idea what they want to do with their lives. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and every time I tried to get out of university, my parents basically said, "You're going to university, and you're going to do a degree that gets you a job." And I totally didn't do that. And my parents were horrified when I told them that I was going to do my postgraduate studies in international relations. You were supposed to become a professional. You had a choice: accountant, doctor, lawyer, dentist. Choose one of those. And the other day, I took my kids to a WITS career day. And anthropology and archaeology in this country is huge because we have such amazing archaeological excavations going on, and we're getting to re-understand the emergence and the evolution of human beings here. And this student got up and said, "Well, my job is to build ancient, to look at how, these prehistoric people hunted and to redesign their weapons." And I thought, my parents never told me that I could have that as a job. They would like doctor, lawyer, accountant, dentist. And you think that things have changed so much that I think that it's so important to encourage students to come to university to really find out who they are and what it is that they want to do or good at. I think that my partner is a lawyer, and we studied together. And after seeing what he saw in law, I certainly realized that I just didn't. The subject did not move me at all. It was boring. It was dull, and it didn't change the world. And I had always been interested in international relations, even though I didn't really know it was called international relations at that time. And I think that was good. And I think that, looking back, I had a lot of mental health issues as a young adult. And it took me until I was in my 30s to really, get diagnosis and get medication, and to realize that, these are, this is a chronic illness that is treatable, and that you can live and you can get on with your life. And I think that I'm very frank with my students about these things, that, if you need help, get help. Don't have your parents, a lot of parents often say, well, mental health issues aren't real issues. There is no such thing as attention deficit disorder or OCD and things like that. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of young people often, spend, waste a lot of time because they are so frightened of confronting these issues that they just never get help. But I think what was really important in getting over these issues were my lecturers, and they were encouraging and they were helpful. And I think when I got to my honors year, I ended up with a mentor who saw more potential in me than I saw in myself, and pushed me a little bit further than I probably would have been comfortable in pushing myself. And I think what was really nice about graduate studies as well is that all of a sudden you don't have to be juggling all these different areas of expertise, that you can begin to focus and start to specialize on what it is that you're doing. And I think that in the lesson from all of this is that I think that it's very important to start to nurture and help students from the time they get into an undergraduate program to the time that they leave, and that they should be made aware of all the programs that exist at universities to help them. And to, I often say to students, look, if I thought that I was anywhere capable as a counselor, I would have majored in psychology. I know that this is not what I am, but, I can tell you my story, and I can definitely point you in the right direction, if you need help and assistance and further things. I'm very, very happy to help you and be supportive in that way. But, if you, and try to inculcate in my students that if you run into issues, please tell me sooner rather than later, because there are so many things that I can do to help you if you come to me earlier. And I know that often it's you're just not in a place where you can acknowledge that you need help, or you need some concessions. But the sooner you feel that you can come and just say something, you don't have to tell me in great detail what's going on, but then I can move your academic life around so you can cope. So I think that what my own experience as a student has taught me is that I see teaching and learning be deal with people holistically.
And showcase some of the personal vulnerability, right, as a human being, and say, we can't help you after the car has crashed, but we can do a whole bunch of things leading up to it that hopefully make the car not crash, right? So
Yeah.
So whether that is personal or institutional, professor or friend, it's so intertwined.
No, definitely. And I think that a lot of students, I don't know if students in what it's like in Canada, but first years really in South Africa often hold academics in incredible high esteem. And sometimes I think it's good to tell people that I'm pretty normal. And there are days where I do famously at all the things that I'm doing, and there are days that I mess up, and I make mistakes even now. I'm not always perfect. I don't get it right the first time all the time. And so that there is, there's room to learn and to make mistakes. And tell my students, oh, for heaven's sakes, this is a social science, international relations. There's no right answer. So, just give me any answer. If you can tell me why you think your answer is right, well, good. We'll have a great interactive conversation. But you don't have to be frightened to say things, because this is not, we're not a science where there may be one answer. And even scientists, there are a lot of things that scientists don't really know for sure. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've learned that in the middle of this pandemic, that science alone is not going to save us, that we need to understand from so many different disciplines and perspectives, the things that make us human, the ways that connect us, the things that push us into better ways of being and being with one another. And I think that I'm really interested in the ways in which you have framed and maybe frame for us a little bit more the social justice. And just listening to you talk about your mentors reminds me of a book that I read every semester when I get the most droopy and despairing. And it's called The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer, who is a Quaker philosopher and educational reformer. And he, as you were speaking, I called up the quotation, because he says, when you're wondering what your purpose is, he says, the thing that you do is you connect with the mentors who evoked us and the subject of study that chose us to make sense of the forces that converge in our lives. And so you've talked a lot about the mentorship, and you've also talked about what you didn't like, law, engineering. But I wonder if you could talk to us about the ways in which that subject of study of social justice and restorative justice chose you, and how it allows you or gives you a frame to understand the forces that are converging right now, us at 2 years now into the pandemic and taking us through that portal into a post-pandemic world.
I think that for a South African who lives in a society that really, there is just so much, political. South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, and it is visible that it's not something. I suppose if you're privileged and you live in a gated community where you have your hospital and all your shops and and security guards, then you can sort of isolate yourself from the reality that most South Africans have to face. But I have always believed that education is the way that you change the world. So I'm very Paulo Freire, the pedagogy of the that teaches people, education changes lives. It gives people, it's also once again, it's all the intangible things that education does. It doesn't just give you knowledge, but it gives you, a sense of, self-worth, confidence, different perspectives. And I think that's why I really love being an educator in South Africa, because I think even when you think that nobody gets anything, and students may be hostile and upset, and they why didn't you put the slides up, but 5 minutes earlier than you put them up, and you still have to remind that you're changing lives, and you're making a difference. And for a lot of these students, these are the first people that are ever coming to university. These may be the first people who've ever finish school. I can't believe that I'm saying this in 2022 in South Africa. We were hoping that things were better, but to get to the stage where you have to say to people, it's important that you think about social justice. And I often say to my students is that I'm not being politically neutral in a lot of the stuff that I'm teaching you, because I want you to think about these things. What is good, what is right, what is just. And because these are the things that as adults you're going to have to grapple. A lot of people, a lot of you will go into government service, and you've got to think about the big picture. We've got to get away from this idea where government is, or government jobs, or ways of a way to enrich yourself as an individual, but that to inculcate this whole idea of service. And so I was talking to a class today about the African philosophy of Ubuntu. There's this whole idea of being centered around a communal understanding of society, and to work to benefit humanity and to grow humanity before or your community before you grow yourself as an individual. And in growing your community, you grow yourself as an individual. But the problem is that this is an ideal that as Africans it gets trotted out all the time, but it's an ideal that is not necessarily an ideal that we hold ourselves to every day. And so it's important to think about these things, and to think about where we're going as a society. And if you're talking about rediscovering knowledges from the global south, are we going to be very happy with the knowledges that we come up with? What happens if they harken back to ideas and ideals that go against the prevailing norms and societal values that we have at the moment? What happens if they go against capitalist values? To think about things like social justice, the challenges that Africans face, the austerity, instead of spending more money on education, there's always the temptation to not give as much to healthcare and to look to other countries where they've got social justice issues right or better than us, and what did they do, and what can we learn, and what can't we learn from these ideas.
So Jessica, it feels like the perfect time for your question number 12, and I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'm going to let you ask it.
No, you steal it. Go.
Okay.
We're a team.
So one thing that's come out of the last response that you gave, Jaqui, was about, it's more than teaching content. It's more than the sum of the parts sort of thing. And so one of the concepts that we've really looked at is building hope, right? And so, you've also talked about colleagues that you grew up in academia with, and you're all deans and unit chairs and things like that now. So thinking for yourself, or maybe in cahoots with your colleagues there, if you could build Hope University, right, that just changes the system and makes things the way that it needs to be, what would Hope University look like for you?
I think that, from a South African's perspective, the first thing that we've got to look at is university costs. And so, costs shouldn't be, the amount of money that a university education costs shouldn't be a reason to deny people access to education. And I think that goes for education across the board, that education is a public good, and In this country, we spend all kinds of crazy money on all kinds of crazy things that really don't, if we didn't have, if politicians didn't have 100 million bodyguards, I'm quite sure, a few would suffice. And that we could put this money into, into allowing people to have education. The ability to have access to knowledge. It would be very nice when, this is very idealistic, is that knowledge can be shared without having to pay a small fortune for things like books. So I tease my colleagues who write in the Global South that, your books are fantastic, just nobody in the Global South can afford to buy them. So, I mean, this is knowledge for the Global South that the Global South can't get hold of. Well done. So that knowledge would be accessible, that it would be nice if my students could dialogue with students from other countries. So they could understand how similar and how different they are. Because I think that a lot of time, people, when they're isolated, you can, really develop tunnel vision, and you don't see things in a bigger or wider perspective. And things that my MEd supervisor always used to say is that you need to develop an imagination for the possible. You lack the ability to see what can be done. You lack that imagination, and so I think that it's important to inculcate within to develop ways of seeing, and to get students to be solution orientated, because there are real world issues. And I think that for students to really think about what it is that they're doing, in a higher education institution. What do you think that you're going to get? Because a piece of paper doesn't necessarily give you a job. So if you're here, it needs to be more than just the piece of paper at the end. And I think that mentorship programs are really important. And I think it's also important to make the university a safe environment for students. I mean, we've had a lot of things brought to our attention with the Me Too movement, and so this has got to be a way where a place where students learn how to interact appropriately with each other and respectfully with each other, and that lecturers are the first to lead by examples with that as well. And that it's a place where it's not just the where everybody's included, not just people who can pay, or people from dominant communities and cultures, that it's a place for a multi-ethnic, multi-gender space and place.
I love that. You just gave us the list, the roadmap for Hope University, right? Inclusive, accessible, diverse, equitable, safe, and brave. And, it really captures the sort of philosophy of Freire that you quoted earlier, where he actually defines hope as the ethical quality of the struggle. And you said that a little earlier. You said, I don't think that we'll ever, you're never going to think that you arrive. You're never going to be on the top of the mountain looking down at the people who are unenlightened and think, I've got this now, I've got the answers. That there is an ethical quality of the struggle in those hopeful future-facing spaces. And you've just modeled that for us beautifully over this conversation. And I want to thank you for being safe and brave to share your story, to share your failures and reflections, critical reflections and insights onto onto our conversations about what can we challenge in terms of the actual to think about the possible. And I think your imagination of the possible has just given us such a rich set of insights. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It was lovely to be here.
It's nice well, let's get our conversation.
To like-minded. How we get people in management to think in the same direction is I think one of the biggest challenges. Is that to get people to see things differently. And I think I've worked under so many different regimes at our university, and sometimes you feel that you're working with, and then sometimes you feel that you're working against. And I think it's nice if we could get the people at the top on the same page as everything else.
Yeah. And I think that starts with listening, right? With listening with the intention to transform. And this conversation will be shared and amplified, and maybe it'll spark some inspiration or ideas across different kinds of tables. And you never know. Parker Palmer says sometimes a good conversation is edifying in and of itself, and sometimes it sparks new things that you can't imagine. And I think that's really, really special to carve out that space. And thank you for joining us in that space.
Thank you, Pat and Jessica. It's been wonderful. And the team behind all of this that do the technology that we've all had to learn how to do
absolutely
over the last 2 years.